These aren't vacation snaps. Smiling into the camera, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady stood literally on top of the shallow graves where they'd buried murdered children. Souvenirs taken on the bleak moor that became their killing field. Windswept moors, endless gray skies, and a silence so thick it chills your bones. Now imagine standing in that desolate landscape, unaware you're inches from where 5 children were laid to rest. Worse, the killers documented it. These are the photos Ian Brady and Myra Hindley took of each other, smugly posing on graves they dug themselves. Today, we unravel how 2 lovers turned this moor into a burial ground, and why these haunting images became their downfall. A place so vast and empty, it swallows sound, a place where the land itself keeps secrets. For Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, Saddleworth Moor wasn't just wilderness, it was the perfect accomplice. Saddleworth Moor stretches for miles under brooding northern skies, a landscape of raw, untamed beauty, rolling hills cloaked in heather, peat bogs that suck at your boots, sudden storms that blot out the sun without warning. To walk here is to feel utterly alone, isolated, unseen, and that's exactly why Brady chose it. This wasn't scenery to him, it was a blueprint for the perfect crime. Brady, steeped in Nazi philosophy and obsessed with nihilism, saw the moor's bleakness as a reflection of his own worldview, a dumping ground, a canvas for his arrogance. Hindley, blindly infatuated, followed him into that emptiness. She traded her ordinary life for the role of accomplice, seeing the moors not as a grave, but as a stage for their power. To locals, these moors were simply part of the fabric of the North, a place for sheep grazing or Sunday hikes. But to Brady and Hindley, it was a hunting ground, a place where cries wouldn't carry, where peat preserved what they buried, where the wind erased footprints. The moor didn't judge. It didn't intervene. It just existed, beautiful, brutal, and utterly indifferent to the darkness it concealed. It started like 1,000 other stories in Manchester. 1961, a bored young woman meets a mysterious older man. But this wasn't romance. This was the beginning of a nightmare. Myra Hindley was 19. She worked as a typist. On the surface, ordinary. But inside, she felt stifled, craved something more, something dangerous. Then she met Ian Brady. He was 23, brooding, intense, an outcast. He worked as a stock clerk, but his mind was elsewhere, deep in books about Nazis, philosophy, and the darkest corners of human nature. To Hindley, he wasn't just different. He was fascinating, magnetic. He represented everything her dull life wasn't. And that's exactly how he trapped her. He saw her loneliness, her hunger for rebellion. Brady wasn't looking for a girlfriend. He was looking for a follower, a partner, someone he could shape. He began feeding her mind like poison. He lent her books, not love stories, books by the Marquis de Sade, full of torture, cruelty, and the idea that morality was a joke. Books about Hitler and the Nazis, praising power, control, and the elimination of the weak. He talked endlessly about nihilism, the belief that nothing matters, that life is meaningless. To a young woman searching for identity, it felt like a dark, thrilling secret, a truth others were too scared to see. Brady didn't just encourage her darkness. He cultivated it. He weaponized her growing devotion. Their relationship twisted rapidly. It wasn't about love or companionship anymore. It became a shared obsession with power and transgression. Brady tested her limits. Small acts of cruelty, vandalism, petty theft. He watched how far she'd go to please him. Hindley, desperate for his approval, his attention, went further each time. She wasn't just infatuated. She was becoming compliant, willingly blind. She adopted his beliefs, his hatreds, his coldness. He convinced her they were superior, above the law, above morality. Ordinary people were just prey. By 1963, the transformation was complete. Myra Hindley wasn't a typist anymore. She was Ian Brady's disciple, his accomplice. Their bond wasn't a romance. It was a pact sealed in darkness. The pact had a terrible purpose: lure, torture, kill. Why children? Because Brady saw them as the easiest targets, the most vulnerable, the least likely to be believed or to fight back effectively. And because, in his warped ideology, their innocence was something to corrupt, to destroy, to prove his absolute power over life itself. Hindley, under his total control, went along with it. She became the lure, the friendly young woman who could approach a child without suspicion. She used her car, a symbol of ordinary life, as a tool of abduction. Brady provided the sadistic vision. Hindley provided the terrifyingly normal facade that made it possible. Between July 1963 and October 1965, they murdered 5 children, 5 young lives stolen. Each name is a universe of loss, and we must speak them, remember them, not as victims defined by their killers, but as the children they were. Pauline Reed, she was 16, disappeared walking to a dance on July 12, 1963. She knew Hindley slightly from the neighborhood. That tiny connection was enough. John Kilbride, just 12 years old, last seen at a market in Ashton-under-Lyne on November 23, 1963. Keith Bennett, he was 12, on his way to his grandmother's house on June 16, 1964, a short walk that never ended. Leslie and Downey, she was 10, taken from a funfair on Boxing Day. December 26, 1964, Edward Evans, 17, killed in a brutal frenzy in Hindley's own house on October 6, 1965. His murder was the one that finally shattered their secret world. The mechanics of their evil were chillingly methodical. Hindley would approach the children, often using her dog as a friendly prop, or offering a lift in her car. Once inside, the trap snapped shut. They'd be driven out to the vast, empty expanse of Saddleworth Moor, a place Brady knew well, a place chosen for its isolation, its silence. What happened there, in the howling wind under the gray sky, is unspeakable. Suffice to say, Brady's fascination with Desaad wasn't theoretical. Pain, terror, degradation, these were tools he wielded with horrifying intent. Hindley participated. She watched. She helped. She took photographs. She recorded audio tapes capturing the final, terrified moments of a child pleading for her mother. This wasn't just compliance. It was active, eager partnership in atrocity. How did a young woman become this? How does devotion turn into complicity in the murder of children? Psychiatrists have wrestled with it for decades. Was Hindley inherently evil? Was she mentally ill? Or was she simply so utterly dominated, so psychologically broken by Brady, that she lost herself entirely? The terrifying answer might lie somewhere in the middle. Brady was a master manipulator, preying on her insecurities and her craving for belonging. He isolated her from her family, fed her a steady diet of poison, and rewarded her obedience with twisted affection. But Hindley made choices. She chose to embrace the darkness he offered. She chose not to walk away. She chose to lure children to their deaths. She chose to stand by while horrors unfolded. She chose to help bury them on the moors. Her later claims of being under Brady's spell ring hollow against the sheer, active cruelty of her actions. This wasn't possession. It was a terrifyingly human descent into evil, step by willing step. Their relationship was the engine of the murders. It fed on shared secrets, shared power, and the perverse thrill of getting away with the unthinkable. Brady provided the ideology and the sadism. Hindley provided the access, the disguise of normalcy, and the terrifying efficiency. They fueled each other's darkness. Brady's cold intellect needed Hindley's practical ruthlessness to make his fantasies real. Hindley's need for purpose and belonging found its monstrous fulfillment in serving Brady's vision. It was a feedback loop of depravity. Each crime cemented their bond further. Each burial on the moor was a shared trophy. The photos they took of each other there weren't just evidence. They were perverse love tokens, celebrating their shared dominion over life and death. By 1965, the cracks were showing. The Evans murder, done in a frenzy in Hindley's house, was messy. Unlike the carefully planned abductions on the moor, it left immediate traces. Hindley's own brother-in-law, David Smith, witnessed the aftermath, the blood, the body, the chilling calm of Brady and Hindley cleaning up. Horrified, Smith went to the police. It was this betrayal from within their small, closed circle that finally brought the house of cards crashing down. The police raid on Hindley's house uncovered the hidden locker key. That key unlocked the physical evidence that would tie them to the moors. The tapes, the photos, the literal map to their buried secrets. The toxic romance that had spawned such horror was finally exposed. The story of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley is a stark, terrifying lesson. It shows how evil doesn't always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes it starts with a whisper, a lonely young woman, a charismatic, angry man, a shared feeling of being above it all. It shows how easily ideology can be twisted into a justification for atrocity. How devotion can be weaponized. How ordinary people can make choices that lead them into unimaginable darkness. Theirs was a bond forged not in love, but in shared cruelty and a lust for power over the utterly helpless. It remains one of the most disturbing and perplexing criminal partnerships in British history. Not because they were monsters from a fable, but because they were terrifyingly, devastatingly human. And that is perhaps the most chilling truth of all. The murders were horrific enough, but for Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, killing wasn't the end. It was just another step in a sickening ritual. After burying their victims in the lonely vastness of Saddleworth Moor, they didn't stay away. They didn't try to forget. Instead, they came back. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. They would drive out to the bleak, windswept hills, park Hindley's car, and walk deliberately to the very spots where they had hidden the bodies of Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, and Leslie and Downey. This wasn't about guilt or remorse. It was about celebration, about reliving their power. And they documented it. They brought a camera, an ordinary, everyday object turned into a tool of pure evil. Ian Brady, the brooding intellectual, would point it at Myra Hindley. She would pose, not with sadness, not with shame, but with something chillingly close to pride. In one infamous photograph taken on Holland Brown Knoll, a specific rise on the moor, Hindley stands tall. Her face is turned slightly towards the camera. She isn't crying. She isn't hiding. She's grinning. A slight, unsettling smile plays on her lips. Beside her, almost a macabre prop, sits her dog, Puppet. The animal looks alert, perhaps sensing the tension its master ignores. Behind Hindley stretches the desolate moor, the gray sky, the rough grass, the endless emptiness that swallowed their secrets. This wasn't a tourist snap. She wasn't posing for a holiday album. She was standing, quite literally, on top of where they had buried John Kilbride only weeks before. And it wasn't one-sided. Hindley took the camera too. She aimed it at Brady. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His pose was one of cold, arrogant dominance. He stands on the moor, often on another known burial site, arms folded tightly across his chest. His eyes glare directly into the lens, challenging, unflinching, devoid of any warmth or humanity. It's the look of a man who believes he has conquered something, conquered the land, conquered death itself, conquered the society he despised. The wind whips at his coat. The moor stretches bleakly behind him, but his stare is fixed, hard, and terrifyingly self-satisfied. He looks like a conqueror surveying his grim domain. But perhaps the most chilling image of all is one taken by Brady. Hindley is posing again. She's crouched down slightly, looking away from the camera this time, towards a point in the distance. Her right arm is outstretched. Her finger is pointing. She isn't pointing at a bird, or a landmark, or anything beautiful. Forensic experts and investigators would later understand with horrifying certainty what she was indicating. She was pointing directly towards the shallow grave of 10-year-old Leslie and Downey, a little girl they had murdered on Boxing Day, a little girl whose terrified pleas they had recorded on tape just days before. Hindley wasn't just posing near a grave. She was actively gesturing towards it, a visual boast, a marker for their own twisted memory, proof, in their minds, of their absolute ownership over that patch of earth and the innocent life hidden beneath it. What were these pictures? They weren't casual snapshots. They weren't accidental. They were deliberate, calculated acts. They weren't souvenirs of a day out. Souvenirs are innocent reminders. These were trophies, dark, perverse trophies, much like a hunter might pose with a dead animal. But these weren't animals. These were children. Pauline, John, Keith, Leslie Ann. The photos were Brady and Hindley's way of capturing their victory over life and death. They were proof of their control over their victims, control over the narrative, and ultimately, a warped sense of control over the vast, indifferent moor itself. By photographing themselves on these graves, they were stamping their ownership onto the landscape. They were saying, "Look what we did. Look where we hid them. This place belongs to us now." It was an act of profound desecration and even deeper arrogance. Why did they do it? Psychologists might point to the need for control common in such killers. The photos were a way to revisit the crime, to re-experience the power and thrill without the immediate risk. They were a permanent record of their achievement, something they could look at later, reinforcing their shared secret and their bond. For Brady, the intellectual, it might have been part of his documentation, turning real horror into a kind of perverse art or historical record, aligning with his fascination with Nazism and control. For Hindley, desperate for Brady's approval, Posing for these photos was another way to demonstrate her loyalty, her participation, her shared commitment to his dark vision. It proved she wasn't squeamish. It proved she was just as involved, just as cold. The sheer normality of the act is part of its horror. Taking photos on a day out is something countless couples do. Smiling for the camera is instinctive, but here, transposed onto the burial ground of murdered children, that normality becomes grotesque. Hindley's grin, seen in the context of where she stood, becomes a mask of pure evil. Brady's defiant stare becomes the look of a man utterly consumed by his own monstrous ego. The pointing finger shifts from a casual gesture to a finger of accusation against innocence itself. The presence of the dog, an innocent animal, only heightens the sense of awful, jarring dissonance, life and domesticity juxtaposed with death and depravity. The photos also reveal a terrifying confidence. They believed they were untouchable. They believed the Moor would keep their secrets forever. They believed no one would ever connect the smiling woman in the picture, or the brooding man, with the missing children. They believed these images were safe, private tokens of their power. They stored them away carefully, along with the tapes and other grim mementos, confident in their own cleverness. This confidence was their fatal flaw. It blinded them to the risk they were taking by keeping such concrete, physical evidence. These weren't just memories. They were maps. They were confessions frozen on film. When the police finally discovered these photos hidden in a suitcase in the left luggage office at Manchester Central Station, found using the key taken from Hindley's prayer book, the true horror dawned. Detectives stared at these ordinary-looking holiday snaps, but trained eyes saw the lack of landmarks, the specific contours of the hills, the bleak emptiness. They saw Hindley pointing. They saw Brady standing like a sentinel. Suddenly, these weren't just pictures of a couple on the moors. They were signposts. They were grim postcards from hell. They became the key that unlocked the Moor's terrible secrets, leading investigators directly to the graves of John Kilbride and Leslie and Downey. The very trophies Brady and Hindley created to celebrate their control became the irrefutable evidence that would strip them of it forever. The Moor murders photos stand as one of the most chilling aspects of this entire case. They offer a direct, unsettling window into the minds of the killers. They show not just the acts, but the attitude, the smugness, the utter lack of remorse, the perverse pride in their horrific deeds. They transform the desolate beauty of Saddleworth more into a backdrop for pure evil. They remind us that the darkest acts are often accompanied not by shadows, but by the flash of a camera, freezing a moment of monstrous triumph for all time. They are not just pictures. They are a permanent stain on history. Arrogance. It's often the flaw that trips up even the cleverest criminals. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley thought they were untouchable. They thought their planning was perfect. Their confidence was sky high. But on the night of October 6th, 1965, it all started to unravel because of a single, brutal mistake. Edward Evans, just 17 years old, was lured back to Hindley's house on Wardlebrook Avenue. Brady attacked him in a frenzy with an axe. It was savage, messy, and crucially, it wasn't out on the isolated moors. It was inside a house, in a city street, and Hindley's own brother-in-law, David Smith, witnessed the bloody aftermath. Smith had been roped in by Hindley, perhaps as a potential new recruit, or just an extra pair of hands. What he saw that night shattered him. Brady beating Evans with an axe, the body lying broken on the floor. Brady and Hindley calmly discussing how to dispose of it. Smith played along, terrified, but the moment he got home, he told his wife, Hindley's sister, and then he ran straight to the police. Within hours, just before dawn on October 7th, police officers stormed through the front door of 16 Wardlebrook Avenue. The scene they found was horrific. Edward Evans' body, wrapped in a blanket in the back bedroom, bloodstains, and Brady and Hindley, caught completely off guard, arrested on the spot for murder. This was the slip-up. This messy, impulsive killing broke their careful pattern. It brought the police crashing into their secret world. The initial focus was clear, Edward Evans. But seasoned detectives knew this felt bigger. The brutality, the coldness of the killers, the way Brady sneered during questioning. Something wasn't right. While searching the small house inch by inch, Detective Chief Inspector Joe Mounter made a crucial discovery. Hidden inside a prayer book, an almost mocking hiding place, he found a small, unassuming key. Not a house key, not a car key. It was a left luggage locker key for Manchester Central Station. Why hide it? What was so important it needed locking away from their own home? This little key suddenly became the most important piece of evidence they had. Police immediately went to the station. They found the locker. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, they pulled out a heavy suitcase. Opening it, the detectives were hit by a wave of dread. This wasn't just clothes or money. This was a collection of pure evil. First, they found reel-to-reel tape recordings. Playing them was an act of profound courage. The sounds that filled the room were the terrified, pleading voice of a little girl, Leslie and Downey, recorded during her final, agonizing hours, her voice begging for her mother, begging to go home, while Brady and Hindley's cold, adult voices threatened and tormented her. It was proof, in sound, of unspeakable cruelty. But the suitcase held more, much more. Beneath the tapes, wrapped carefully, were photographs, lots of them. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. Holiday snaps, pictures of a couple out walking on the moors. Myra Hindley, standing on a windswept hill, a slight smile on her face, her dog Puppet beside her. Ian Brady, posing sternly, arms folded, staring defiantly at the camera. Another showed Hindley crouched low, pointing off into the distance. They looked like souvenirs from a bleak day out, but detectives looked closer. Something felt deeply wrong. The locations in the photos weren't picturesque. They weren't landmarks people usually visited. They showed desolate stretches of moorland, barren hillsides, empty, windswept vistas. The backgrounds were featureless. Too featureless. Why take so many pictures of nothing? Why pose so carefully in such grim, unremarkable spots? And why was Hindley pointing? Pointing at what? There was nothing to see in the direction her finger indicated. Just empty moor. Detective Sergeant Bob Talbot, studying the images, felt a cold certainty creep over him. These weren't innocent holiday pictures. They were something far darker. They were records, markers. They were photographs taken deliberately at the grave sites of their victims. Hindley wasn't smiling on a random hill. She was standing on John Kilbride's shallow grave. That point of her finger? It was aimed directly at where they'd buried Leslie and Downey. The realization was chilling and explosive. These photos weren't just trophies Brady and Hindley kept for themselves. Unwittingly, they had created maps, detailed maps. Each photo captured specific contours of the land, distinctive rock formations, the angles of slopes on Saddleworth Moor. They showed the exact spots. The barrenness wasn't a flaw in the picture. It was the point. It showed the isolation, the chosen locations. By posing on these specific, unremarkable patches of moor, Brady and Hindley had inadvertently given the police the precise coordinates they needed. The detectives now held in their hands Brady's own directions to hell. Suddenly, the entire investigation exploded in scale. This wasn't just about Edward Evans anymore. The tapes proved Leslie and Downey was dead. The photos strongly suggested she, and likely others, were buried out on those moors. Police urgently contacted experts. They brought in geologists and cartographers. They gathered every map of Saddleworth Moor they could find. Then, they took the photos. They laid them out, comparing the bleak landscapes in the snapshots to the contours on the maps. It was painstaking work, matching the shape of a distant hill in a grainy photo to a line on an Ordnance Survey map, identifying a specific cluster of rocks visible behind Brady's shoulder, following the line of Hindley's pointing finger across the moorland terrain marked on the map. The focus narrowed dramatically on one area, Holland Brown Knoll. The photos featuring Hindley and her dog, the one where she pointed, they all centered on this particular rise. On October 10th, 1965, just 3 days after Evan's body was found in the house, police search teams began the grim task of scouring Holland Brown Knoll. They moved slowly, carefully, probing the peat with long rods. The moor was vast, the task overwhelming, but the photos gave them a target. They weren't searching blindly. They were following the killer's own visual guide. And then, the rods hit something. Not rock, something softer. They started digging. Peat is dark, heavy, and preserves what it buries. Soon, they uncovered clothing. Then, the small, heartbreaking remains of a child. It was John Kilbride. Missing since November 1963, Brady and Hindley's secret was literally unearthed. The discovery was shattering confirmation. The photos were maps, the arrogance that made Brady and Hindley return to the graves, that made them pose and take pictures, that made them keep those pictures as prized possessions. That same arrogance led the police straight to the bodies. Days later, Guided again by the photos and the landscape they revealed, searchers found a second grave nearby. This time, it was Leslie and Downey. The little girl whose terrified voice was on the tapes now lay silent beneath the moor where her killers had proudly pointed towards her resting place. The evidence was irrefutable. The tapes proved the murder. The photos proved the burial. Brady and Hindley weren't just murderers. They were serial killers. The locker key, hidden in the prayer book, was the thread that unraveled everything. Without it, the suitcase, the tapes, the photos, the damning evidence linking them to the moors, might never have been found. Edward Evans' murder brought the police crashing down on them. But it was the photos, Brady and Hindley's own sickening souvenirs, that exposed the full, monstrous scope of their crimes. They thought the photos proved their control over the moor and their victims. Instead, they became the coordinates that led to their own destruction. The very tools they used to celebrate their evil became the undeniable proof that locked them away forever. Their belief in their own superiority, in the perfection of their secret, was their fatal mistake. Justice, finally, began on the bleak hills they thought belonged only to them. With Ian Brady and Myra Hindley locked in cells, the grim focus shifted from the killers to the moor. Saddleworth Moor, once their silent accomplice, now held the evidence that could condemn them utterly and bring some measure of peace to shattered families. But the moor wasn't giving up its secrets easily. The chilling photos discovered in the suitcase were spread out like maps on police tables. Detectives, geologists, and search experts hunched over them. They weren't looking at the smirking faces of Brady or Hindley anymore. They were looking past them, into the bleak backgrounds. That patch of slightly different grass? That distinctive, jagged rock just visible on the horizon? The angle of that slope where Hindley pointed? These tiny details, captured by the killer's own camera, became vital clues. The photos were a grim puzzle, and solving it meant finding the children. The first breakthrough came fast, driven by desperation and those damning images. Guided by the specific locations shown in the photos, particularly the ones taken at Holland Brown Knoll, search teams returned just 3 days after Brady and Hindley's arrest. October 10th, 1965, the moor was harsh, cold, unforgiving. Men probed the thick, dark peat with long metal rods. Walking in careful lines, it felt like searching for a needle in a vast, gray haystack, but the photos gave them a target area. Then, a rod sank deeper than usual. It met resistance, but not the hard resistance of stone. Something else. Gently, carefully, they began to dig. The peat peeled back, layer by heavy layer. Soon, they uncovered cloth. Then, tragically, the small, fragile remains of a child. It was John Kilbride, 12 years old, missing for nearly 2 years, found because his killers had proudly photographed themselves standing over his grave. The earth, finally, was giving up one of its terrible secrets. Just days later, the same grim process, guided relentlessly by the photographic evidence and the landscape they revealed, led searchers to another spot nearby on the same desolate knoll. Again, the probing rods. Again, the careful excavation. This time, they found Leslie and Downey, 10 years old, murdered on Boxing Day, just 10 months before. The little girl whose terrified voice echoed from the tapes was now silent beneath the peat. Her recovery was heartbreaking proof. The tapes proved her suffering. The photos proved where they hid her. The moor was yielding its dead, one awful revelation at a time. John and Leslie were coming home, but the cost of finding them was immeasurable grief made real. But the nightmare wasn't over. 5 children were known to be missing. Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett were still out there, somewhere on that vast moor. The photos gave some clues, but they weren't a complete map. Hindley and Brady, initially defiant, gave nothing away. The searches continued, but without the specific markers found for John and Leslie Ann. The task became monumental. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. The moor kept its silence. The families of Pauline and Keith lived in a torturous limbo, haunted by the unknown. Where were their children? The landscape that had hidden John and Leslie so effectively now seemed to swallow Pauline and Keith without a trace. The initial momentum of October 1965 slowed. Hope, for those families, became a painful, daily burden. Years passed. Brady and Hindley were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment in 1966. Life meant life, but behind bars, the dynamic began to shift, driven by self-interest. Myra Hindley, perhaps genuinely remorseful, but certainly desperate for the possibility of parole, began to talk, decades after the crimes. In the 1980s, she started confessing to her full involvement. She admitted her role in luring Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett. She agreed to return to the moor with police, trying to pinpoint the burial sites she and Brady had chosen so long ago. It was a strange, disturbing spectacle, the killer walking the killing ground, searching her own memory under police escort. In 1987, guided by Hindley's fragmented recollections, searchers finally found Pauline Reed. She had been missing for 24 years. She was buried on the moor, a teenager never able to go to that dance. One more secret the moor reluctantly surrendered. Yet one child remained lost. Keith Bennett, 12 years old when he vanished in June 1964. His grave became an obsession, a dark void. His mother, Winnie Johnson, became the relentless voice calling for answers. She wrote letters, gave interviews, pleaded with anyone who could help find her son. She begged Brady directly. Hindley, despite her later confessions, couldn't provide a clear enough location for Keith. The moor, vast and changeable, defied her memory. And then there was Brady. Ian Brady reveled in the mystery. He held the knowledge of Keith's location like a final, cruel card. He played games. He sent cryptic letters, hinting at clues, drawing crude maps, taunting the police and torturing Winnie Johnson. He claimed he had written the location down and hidden it, only to later say it was lost. He spoke of coordinates, of landmarks, but his words were twisted, unreliable, designed to confuse and prolong the agony. He enjoyed the power it gave him, even from his prison cell. Finding Keith became not just a search, but a battle against Brady's malice. Winnie Johnson never gave up. Year after year, decade after decade, she fought for her son. She walked the moors herself, a mother's desperate pilgrimage. She confronted the bleakness that had taken him, searching for any sign the professionals might have missed. Her plea was simple, shattering. Tell me where he is. Just tell me where my Keith is. But the answer never came. Science advanced. New searches were mounted using better technology, ground-penetrating radar, drones, detailed soil analysis. Promising spots were investigated, fueled by Brady's hints or fresh interpretations of old evidence. But Saddleworth Moor guarded its last secret fiercely. Keith Bennett was not found. The weight of this unresolved tragedy is immense. Winnie Johnson died in August 2012, aged 78, without knowing where her son lay. She died without the peace of bringing him home. Her lifelong grief stands as a stark testament to the enduring cruelty of Brady and Hindley's crimes. Brady himself died in 2017. Aged 79, still in custody, he took the precise location of Keith Bennett's grave to his own grave, a final act of despicable control. Despite extensive searches continuing even after both killers' deaths, Keith remains missing. The moor, which gave up 3 of its stolen children, still holds Keith close. The digging for truth on Saddleworth Moor brought some answers. But not all. John, Leslie Ann, and Pauline were found because of the killer's arrogance and the dedication of investigators. But Keith Bennett's fate is a wound that never healed. It's a reminder that some truths, buried deep in the earth and deeper still in the hearts of the wicked, remain stubbornly hidden. The moor yielded its secrets grudgingly, piece by piece, but one piece is forever missing. The search for Keith, driven by a mother's love and opposed by a killer's hate, ended not with resolution, but with the heavy silence of the hills and a question that echoes across the decades. Where is Keith Bennett? The moor hasn't told. And now, perhaps, it never will. The truth, for Keith and Winnie, remains buried under peat, under time, and under the unbearable weight of an unanswered plea. The facts of the moor's murders are horrifying enough. The calculated cruelty, the loss of 5 young lives, the desecration of innocence. Yet, decades later, it's the photographs that often linger most unsettlingly in the public memory. Why? What is it about these grainy, bleak snapshots that chills us so deeply? It's not just because they show the killers. It's because of what they reveal about the terrifying nature of evil itself. Look at them. Really look. There's Myra Hindley. She's standing on a windswept hill. She's smiling. Not a huge grin, but a slight, almost relaxed smile. Her dog sits obediently beside her. It looks like a picture any tourist might take on a day trip to the countryside. A bit gloomy. Maybe, but ordinary. Then there's Ian Brady. He stands tall, arms folded across his chest. He stares directly into the camera, his expression hard, defiant, almost proud. He looks like a man posing after conquering a mountain. These poses, these expressions, they are jarringly, sickeningly normal. They look like holiday snaps, like pictures from a day out. That's the first reason they haunt us. The collision of pure evil with absolute, everyday banality. They didn't look like monsters in these pictures. Hindley didn't have a demonic sneer. Brady wasn't snarling like a beast. They looked like two ordinary, if slightly stern or awkward, young people posing awkwardly on a cold, gray day. That's the terrifying disconnect. Evil doesn't always wear a frightening mask. Sometimes it wears the face of the girl next door, or the quiet man at the office. It smiles for the camera. It folds its arms. It looks utterly, chillingly human. The photos force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Monsters can look just like us. They can pose for pictures. They can own a dog. They can seem mundane. That ordinariness is perhaps the most disturbing thing of all. It shatters the comforting myth that we can always spot the darkness in someone's eyes. And then there's the setting. The vast, empty expanse of Saddleworth Moor stretches out behind them. The gray sky, the rough grass, the sense of immense, indifferent space. The moor is silent in these photos, a silent witness. Yet, beneath Hindley's feet, beneath Brady's defiant stance, lay the bodies of children they had murdered. The contrast is unbearable. The casual pose, the everyday act of taking a picture, happening literally on top of a grave, the woman smiling where a child was buried, the man looking proud where he had inflicted unspeakable pain. The landscape itself becomes complicit, not through action, but through its vast, uncaring silence. The moor whispers beneath them, holding secrets the camera couldn't see, but we now know are there. That knowledge stains every pixel of the image. What did these photos mean to Brady and Hindley? We know they were trophies, proof of their conquest, proof that they had dominated life and death, proof that they controlled this wild, empty place. They believed the photos cemented their power. They believed these images were a permanent record of their invincibility, their secret triumph over society and morality. They thought they were celebrating their own cleverness, their ability to commit the perfect crime and then revisit the scene, untouched, uncaught. The photos were, for them, the ultimate symbol of control. But history played a cruel, ironic trick. The photos didn't cement their power. They exposed its fatal fragility. That very act of returning, of posing, of documenting their crimes, it was pure arrogance. It was a mistake born of believing they were too smart to ever be caught. They kept the photos. They hid them, but they kept them. They couldn't resist owning these tokens of their evil. And because they kept them, the police found them. Those photos, intended as private celebrations, became the most public evidence of their guilt. The holiday snaps became maps. The proof of their control became the blueprint for their downfall. The moor, which they thought belonged to them, gave them up through their own images. The power they thought they had froze on film, only to be used against them. Their control was an illusion shattered by a suitcase key and a detective's sharp eye. Finally, the photos haunt us because they became symbols. Symbols of a specific nightmare that gripped England in the 1960s and has never truly let go. They are shorthand for the case itself, the Moor's murders. Mention those photos, and anyone familiar with the story feels a shiver. Hindley's face, framed by that harsh blonde hair, became one of the most recognizable and reviled images in British criminal history. Brady's cold stare is burned into the collective memory. They symbolize the loss of innocence, not just of the children, but of a society forced to confront the depths of human depravity lurking in seemingly ordinary people. They symbolize the enduring pain of unresolved grief, especially for Keith Bennett. Still, lost, his mother's plea echoing unanswered. They symbolize the arrogance of evil and the slow, grinding path of justice. The photos are frozen moments, moments where evil felt safe enough to smile, moments where killers posed as conquerors on the graves of the innocent. They capture a terrifying confidence that was ultimately misplaced. But more than that, they capture the horrifying ease with which darkness can wear the clothes of normal life. They remind us that the most profound horrors are often committed not by fantastical monsters, but by people who look like they could be our neighbors, people who take pictures, people who own dogs, people who stand on a moor, smiling into the lens, while unimaginable suffering lies buried inches below their feet. That is why, long after Brady and Hindley died, long after the headlines faded, These images still have the power to stop us cold. They are not just pictures of killers. They are stark, unsettling windows into the banality of evil. And that is a view that chills the soul. 5 children, 2 killers, 1 more. When you hear the wind howl over Saddleworth, it carries more than weather, it carries memory. Today, the photos are archived, the killer's gone, but the graves remain. And so do the questions. How does darkness find a home in ordinary hearts? And why did it take a camera to drag it into the light?